I didn't plan on working with the dead. It just sort of happened while I was trying to make rent and not disappoint my grandmother, who believed that every family should have a nurse, a teacher, or somebody who knows how to set a face so your aunt doesn't look like she's grimacing in the coffin. I wasn't good at the first two. The third one stuck. If we were sitting on my back steps right now with a beer, I'd tell you the same thing I tell everyone when they ask me what it's like. Most of it is quiet. It's careful work. There's a rhythm to the small things. Zipping the cot, double-checking the tag, laying out the tools. It gets technical real fast and nobody wants to hear the clinical details. But there's a tenderness to it too. You talk to them, whether you mean to or not. You say things like, "I'm going to move you now." You'll feel cold for a second. It sounds ridiculous out loud, but on the nights I don't say it, the building feels different, like the air holds its breath. My place looks like every small-town funeral home you've ever seen. Old purple carpet in the chapel, wood paneling that makes everything feel like a den in the 80s. The faint smell of lilies even when there aren't any flowers. The prep room, that's where I spent most nights. Steel table, drain in the corner. The lights are those long fluorescent bars that buzz like they're chewing on a thought. There's a cooler with sliding drawers, each with a little clip for a card with the name, case number, and a date. There's a sink that spits rust for the first second and then catches up. On a good night, the loudest thing you hear is the machine cycling, or the old building letting out a groan like it remembered a story. People always want the gross parts. The, "Did anyone ever sit up?" question. Yeah, I've seen a body move. That's just muscles and air. I've heard the sound you never want to hear, a breath pushed out by someone who doesn't breathe anymore. That's gases too, and it can make a room go icy in a heartbeat. I've had lights flicker. I've had radios turn on and off. I don't get dramatic about it. Old wiring, heavy air. The building is a cranky old animal and we live inside it, that's all. Except some nights the building lives inside you. And that's another thing entirely. This was my second year. I'd gotten past the rookie heart thumps, past the first time you're alone with 5 drawers full and a storm banging on the roof. I'd had my first quick makeup miracle, the kind where a family brings a picture and says like this, and you actually get it right for once. I'd had my first truly bad week, fatal wreck, infant death, a veteran with no family but 3 guys from the bar who cried in their suits. That week changed how I move in the room. Slower, kinder. It also changed the little rules I follow. Rule 1, say their name. You'll hear that from a lot of us. If someone's full name is in the room, you're less likely to treat them like a task. Rule 2, never ignore paperwork. Paper is the real boss. If the paper disagrees with what your gut says, you double-check the paper. Rule 3, when something small goes wrong twice in a row, treat it like it went wrong 3 times. Take a step back. Start again. There was an old mortician around town named Ortega who retired out from our place. He was one of those men who looked like he was carved out of walnut. Thick hands, polyglot of curse words, crane-like patience. He left behind a prep log full of tight little notes. Embalmers talk to each other in margins like surgeons do. It's never, "I saw a ghost." It's, "Check left carotid first on this one." Or, "She always wore pink lipstick, so do that." Things that look like nothing from the outside but mean everything in a room like that. I wasn't working the day they told me he passed. Stroke, Quick. The kind of fast you almost forgive because it leaves very little mess. I found out a couple weeks later because I opened the cooler one night, and there he was. Not Ortega himself, but the kind of silence that follows certain men. That's the first time the room felt like it was listening to me, rather than the other way around. The case that set everything off came in on a rainy Tuesday. The summer storms we get here have this way of rolling in like they're late to a party, and that one chased me from the assisted living facility back to the funeral home with the wipers fighting for their life. Her name was Charlotte Ames, 78, no trauma, a tidy death, if such a thing exists. The kind where there's a little Ziploc bag of personal effects, a rosary, a wallet, a pair of glasses, and a note from a nurse who clearly liked her. The note said, "Daughter's name is Carla. Call her when ready." Mom was particular about her hair parting on the left. I remember that last line like a splinter because of what happened after. I always take those notes like commandments. No dyed for the first time hair. No perfume they never wore. Part on the left. There was a second call that day too, and it's the combination that made the week go wrong. A kid named Jacob Reed, 18, a wreck out on County 9. They were still working the scene when dispatch put him on the board for us. Tell me you're ready for a stranger's grief all you want, but a kid changes the air. Even when you've never met them, your hands move differently when you're folding a shirt. You know will never be worn again. The thing about running two tracks alongside each other is that your brain starts filing away details on the wrong shelf if you aren't careful. I learned that in my first month, when I once called a Mr. Payne Mr. Page in front of his family and thought the floor might swallow me. So when Charlotte and Jacob came in on the same day, I did the thing I do. I said their names out loud like I was walking through a room full of people who might raise a hand if I said them wrong. "Charlotte," I said, easing her onto the table. "We're going to take care of you. Carla wants the hair on the left. We got you." Jacob, later, into the cooler when I slid the drawer. "I'm sorry, man. That first night, I set up Charlotte. I won't go into all the steps, because even if you're curious, I don't think you need the play-by-play. Imagine a careful bath and a careful shave, and everything in a very precise order. The thing that matters is that it's quiet, and that you think about what their hands did when they were good at a thing. I always do that. People show up with carpenter calluses, or the hands of a pianist, or the soft little scars that look like dishwater in time. Her hands were small, bird-boned, and I kept imagining knitting needles and a bowl of strawberries, and the way someone uses their knuckle to nudge their glasses up when they're reading. Halfway through, the lights flickered. That happens. Storm. Generator kicked and didn't catch and then did. And then it was just me and her and the humming. I reached into the little effects bag to lay out her rosary so I could play with positioning. I like to do that before things get formal, so I can show a family options. The bag was there. The rosary wasn't. I checked the counter. I checked the cart. I checked the pocket of the plastic she arrived in. Nothing. I did the stupid pat your own jeans pockets thing like I'd somehow slipped it in there given how many times in a day I put a Sharpie behind my ear and lose it. Nothing. It wasn't a big deal. Families lose things and find things. I made a note to ask Carla. I parted her hair to the left. I said her name again. I slid her into the cooler. 2 drawers down, Jacob's card stared back at me. It had a small smear of water on it, a little page wrinkle where the moisture had puckered the edge. I tapped the card to flatten it and went upstairs. The next afternoon, Carla called before I could call her. You can hear grief in people the way you can hear rain before you see it. She had one of those voices that talk very fast because they're holding something heavier behind the words. We made a plan for the next day. She wanted to bring a blouse. She wanted pink lipstick. She asked if I had the rosary, and I told her the truth. I didn't at that moment, but I would find it. When I hung up, I went back down there like I'd left the stove on. I thought maybe it had fallen under the table. Sometimes little things slide and become big problems. The floor was clean except for a tiny curl of thread that I flicked away. I looked at the cooler. The building makes you do that sometimes, like it can hold eye contact. It was very quiet. The hum had that hollow bass sound I know by heart. I pulled Charlotte's drawer. Her card clip had slipped sideways, so the name faced down for a second. No big deal. I straightened it. I told her what I was doing, because that's what I do. And then something tapped on the other side of the cooler wall. 3 taps. Slow. Not the tick of metal settling. Not the shiver of a compressor kicking. A polite knock. I would have laughed if my heart hadn't climbed up behind my teeth. They say if you work there long enough, you see a little of everything. I hadn't seen that. I hadn't heard that. The tap came again, but from a different spot, like someone running their knuckles along a surface looking for a hollow bit. I closed her drawer and opened the next one down. Jacob. Cold air took a breath, and the card clip, the one that had my careful block letters, whispered forward with the movement. No tapping in there. I checked the corners of the drawer. I checked the floor behind the unit. Nothing. I told myself it was pipes. I told myself it was me being a drama queen. I left the cooler open for a second like a dog sniffing at a door, and then I shut it and wrote what I always write when something like that happens. Check compressor noise with Sam. Sam is our repair guy. He's one of those people who knows the difference between "we should fix that" and "it will be fine for 5 more years." He'd once told me about ice building on coil fins making weird sounds. I decided I preferred coil fins to the idea of Charlotte knocking at me. I could have left it at that. If I had, maybe the week would have been normal with a ghost story tacked to the edge. But the next thing wasn't a sound. It was a mistake that wasn't mine. I keep a ledger on the prep room counter. Old school. I also put everything into the software, but I like the pen. The ledger is where the notes live. When I came back from lunch, the page for that week was open, and under Jacob's name, someone had written Rosary. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't in Ortega's tight little letters either. His book had ended months before. It was a rounder hand, almost like a teenager's. I was alone in the building. We don't hire round-handed teenagers to wander the prep room writing Rosary on lines that don't belong to them. I pulled the effects bag for Jacob, and there it was. The Rosary. The same knotted twine. The same worn silver of the cross. I know what you're thinking. Mix up, right? But when we intake, we seal each bag with a little sticker that has the same case number as the tag on the decedent, and the paperwork, and the hairbag, and all the rest. This sticker matched Jacob's numbers, not Charlotte's. I stood there with the room buzzing and the word Rosary staring up at me, and for a second I was mad. Not at a person, at something. That was Charlotte's. And if you've ever seen a daughter ask for one small piece of her mother's life to be right, you'd get why my chest got hot. "Okay," I said out loud, because I talked to rooms. "Okay, we're going to fix this." I took the rosary out. I walked to the cooler without looking away from the beads like they might jump. I slid Charlotte's drawer. I put the rosary in her hands like I was pressing a stamp. I closed the drawer. Then I looked down, and my name card that says Austin, because that's me, had slid off the clip of my own pocket. My stupid Sharpie trick. I bent to pick it up, and when I stood, I saw the glass of water set by the sink ripple like someone had thumped the counter with the heel of their hand. "Sam," I said under my breath, as if that made the water ripples belong to the compressor. That night the storm came back with friends. Power went at 10, came back, went again at midnight. The generator kicked like a mule, and then settled into that coughing hum it has. The chapel upstairs smelled like rain blowing in under the threshold, and those cheap battery candles threw light like old film. I had one more goal before I tried to sleep on the ratty couch in the arrangement office. I wanted to set features for both of them, so the morning wouldn't be a rush with Carla coming at 10. I moved through the steps. Careful. I kept an eye on the rosary like a raccoon who thinks someone's going to steal it. I said Charlotte's name a lot more than usual. I said Jacob's too because he was in the room, and it feels rude to fuss over one person and ignore the other. At 3:17, yes, I remember the exact time because I saw it on the cheap wall clock from the dollar store. The generator hiccuped so hard the lights went black for a second. They came back. The hum didn't. The cooler door handle squeaked. I was at the table. My gloved hand stilled over a bottle cap. I listened so hard I heard my pulse in my ears. The handle squeaked again, just the tiniest bit, not the metal-on-metal squeal, more like the faint rubbery noise of the gasket easing itself back into place after pressure changes. "Don't," I said to the air, which sounds stupid but felt exactly right. "Not tonight." I walked to the cooler like the floor was made of eggshells. I placed my palm flat on the metal. Cold. Normal. I counted to 10 because sometimes, honestly, what you need is to give the room a second to finish what it started. The hum came back like a sigh. Everything felt a degree smaller, like a balloon deflated slightly. I opened the drawer. The rosary was gone. This is the part where you make a joke so you don't scream, right? I made a little collapsing sound in the back of my throat instead, and checked the linens, the corners, the sleeves. Nothing. I opened the next drawer. Jacob. Nothing there either. The third drawer down belongs to a guy named Daniel, who had arrived the week before and was scheduled for cremation the next day. I opened it. There was the rosary, curled perfect in the hollow of his left hand. When I tell this, people always graft big explanations onto it. Thieves, pranks, sleepwalking. You think I didn't run through those like a checklist. But we don't allow cameras in the prep room out of respect. And it was me in there. And the doors were locked. And I don't sleepwalk. And this was not a prank. Nobody screws around with that room. The dead don't deserve games. I took the rosary and I put it back in Charlotte's hands. I whispered, "Sorry. Sorry, sorry." Like I do when I have to clean glue from eyelashes without pulling one out. Then I did something I'd never done, not even on nights when I felt like the world was creeping around the door. I pulled a metal chair up in front of the cooler, and I sat down, and I stared at it. If anything moved, I would see it. If anybody walked in, they would have to get through me first. I lasted 10 minutes, maybe 15. I'm not a hero. My brain started doing that thing where it replays cartoons of every bad thing that has ever happened. I kept hearing those 3 knocks, which I know I probably invented. But that's what brains do in rooms like that. I stood up to stretch. My spine popped. My eyes did that weird sandpaper blink. I said, I'm going upstairs. We are all going to stay where we are. And I left. You've seen enough horror movies to know what the morning would bring. Not blood on the wall spelling my name or a whispering choir in the chapel. That's movie stuff. What I found was paperwork. I came down at 7 with coffee and a headache, and my best company voice zipped up over whatever slept in my stomach. The ledger on the counter was open to a new page. In that same round handwriting, someone had written 2 words. Wrong drawer. That shouldn't have gotten to me as much as it did. Maybe it was the coffee, too strong, or how the cleanup rag from last night still smelled like antiseptic. Maybe it was the way the light slanted through the tiny high window and made the dust shine. I felt angry in a way that doesn't have a direction. My chest felt full of bees. I pulled all 3 drawers. Everyone was where I left them. The cards were where I left them. The rosary was where I left it. I said each name. Then I said, whoever thinks this is funny, stop. At 10, Carla came. She was small and wearing a blouse that looked like something her mother would have bought her. People dress like they're dead on accident. Her hands shook. She brought a faded picture. Like this, she said. Pink lipstick, hair on the left. Those soft details that make your chest pull tight. Normal things. This is the part of the job I like, because you can watch someone's shoulders drop by degrees as you promise these small mercies. She didn't ask to see her mom that day. Some people need that. Some don't. She asked about the rosary, and I said, yes, I found it, which was the most honest version of the truth. Then she hesitated and said, was there a locket too? My brother's ashes are in it. Mom wore it every day. If you've ever had your whole body go cold while your face still smiles, that's what I felt. I checked the intake sheet. No locket listed. I checked the little bag we hadn't gone through yet. No locket. I pulled the property envelope. No locket. I told her I'd look. After she left, I did the stupid thing. I asked the room for help. Charlotte, I said, I need that locket if it's here. I need it bad. The tap came again. 2 light knocks, like someone not wanting to interrupt. I opened the cooler. Nothing had moved. I started to laugh because I felt like an idiot. Then I noticed something small on the lip of the drawer above Charlotte's, the one that had Jacob's name on it. A tiny glint, like an earring catching light. I stepped closer. The locket was hooked there by its chain like a kid had hung it on a doorknob, delicate as a branch. I put my palm under it, and it fell into my hand with a small warm weight that felt like tears. I returned it to the bag. I wrote a note to myself so big in the ledger it looked like yelling. Deliver locket to family 3 p.m. And then I did a very professional thing that I tell you now because I promised to tell you the truth. I cried. Alone, with the ugly fluorescent lights buzzing and the cooler humming and the sharp smell of disinfectant, I sat down and put my face in my hands and cried. If you're going to do this job until your hair turns white, You need to let that pressure out sometimes or it will warp you. That should be the end. A weird week. A rosary prank. A found locket. The dead helping the living. Nice story for the porch in October. But the room wasn't done with me. The next day was cremation day for Daniel. We do a lot of burials here because that's the town, but cremation is creeping up. The retort we have is old but loyal. You learn its moods like a truck. It has a whispery roar that you can feel in your sternum if you stand too close. You do not, under any circumstances, mess around with it. Gas is unforgiving. I was alone again. My director was out with a graveside service. The office assistant had gone home early to beat a migraine. It was me and the machine and a line of cloudy afternoon that made the prep room feel like the inside of a pearl. I did the checks. I moved Daniel with the same softness I move everybody. I closed the door. I fired the thing. It roared the way it always does, and then settled back into that low, devouring sound. At 3:17 again, which, yes, I noticed because when a time gets weird, it never stops being weird, the machine hiccuped. Not the generator this time, the retort itself. The flame surged. The temperature gauge spiked and then dropped so fast it looked like a bird dive bombing and then swooping up. The hairs on my arms stood up. I slammed the emergency off and waited. There's a pause, a terrible, delicate pause, like the room is thinking. The roar died, too slow. The quiet that followed felt stacked, like a layered cake of quiet. From inside the retort, there was a single clang. Imagine tapping a big ceramic bowl with a spoon. That sound. I will not dress this up. I thought about horror movies and how in them idiots open doors to look. I told myself I was not an idiot. I stood there with my hand on the metal, feeling warmth like a heavy blanket, and I whispered, "No, no," because I knew what deep down fear would say even if I didn't say it. The clang came again, softer, like the universe tapping its nails. I opened the door. Heat breathed in my face and took my eyelashes back a fraction. I stood far enough to not bake my eyebrows off and looked inside. Nothing was wrong. I mean, everything was wrong in the sense that inside a cremation chamber is always a little haunting, but nothing was wrong in the way I expected. There wasn't a collapsed shelf or a fault or a loose something. There was just a little line of something shiny at the near edge of the lip. And when I reached for it with a long pair of tongs, I pulled out a single bead. You already know what I'm going to say. It was a rosary bead, a little knot of twine and one small silver bead with a cross stamped into it, fused to a smear of melted something. I had not put the rosary in there. I had checked Daniel's hands. I had checked Daniel's bag. I checked a lot of things because that's my job. That little bead winked in the light like an accusation anyway, and I felt like I wanted to lie down on the floor and let the cool cement take the heat out of my face. I put the bead in a jar. I wrote down what happened with the detail of someone who is trying to convince himself he is sane. Then I did two more very practical things. I finished what I was doing because I had to. And when the building settled for the night and the town did that slow, sleepy quiet, I pulled out all the old logs Ortega had left behind. I stayed up until the cheap clock whined up to 2 a.m. I read margins like prayers. I found notes that had nothing to do with anything and everything to do with what I felt. Check tags twice. Wrong drawer again. Look at cards. It isn't the cards. 3 knocks. Laugh if you want. Don't run the retort at 3. If you have to, say their names first. I don't tell you this to convince you that the dead walk around mad at being dead. Most of the time, the room isn't a haunted house. It's a quiet workshop where grief gets combed and dressed and handed back in a way people can bear to look at. But something wanted me to pay attention to tags. The next morning, I went through the tags like a tyrant. I checked the toe tags and the cards and the paperwork and the software. I even checked the tiny sticker seals on the property bags. They all matched. I would have bet you a week's pay I had it right. Then I pulled a drawer and found my own block letters on a card that was not mine. The clip still had the indentations of my fingers where I hold the edge to straighten it. But the name in my handwriting was wrong above the body I could see. Not a paperwork mistake. Not a fatigue scribble. A thing I had done correctly that was wrong anyway. I stepped back because of Rule 3. When something small goes wrong twice, treat it like it went wrong thrice. I breathed. I said the names. Charlotte, Jacob, Daniel. I said, "Tell me what you want me to see," like I was asking the room for a wrench. The round handwriting showed up again. I didn't see the pen move. I didn't hear anything. But when I turned back to the ledger, the words were there. Ask the daughter about the brother. I had thought I was doing well. Find the rosary. Find the locket. Be a hero to no one but yourself. But the room was telling me this wasn't about beads. It was about something else threaded through the week like fishing line. I called Carla. I told her I'd found the locket. I also asked about the brother. She went quiet so long the line felt dead. "Evan," she said. "My brother was Evan. He died when he was 3. Measles, before me. Mom always said she could still feel the weight of him when she slept on her side. People carry a lot of things into my building. You get familiar with the heft of guilt and devotion and secrets." I said, "Was there a service for him?" She said, "Not really. My parents were moving and it was a mess. He was cremated. We never did anything with the ashes. And I heard it. That hitch in the voice that sounds like a stone being lifted. Mom kept him," she said. "She wore him. There's a thing that happens sometimes in my line. Unclaimed cremains. You'll read about it in think pieces. Funeral homes with shelves of little boxes and tins and urns with people's names on them. It's not the horror show everyone thinks. A lot of times families move and don't leave forwarding, or they say they're not ready, or money is a thing, or the person has no people. We store them. We take care. We wait. I checked the shelf. The old shelf. The one Ortega had always handled. The one with the deepest dust at the back. I pulled down the cardboard boxes and the tiny metal tins. I checked the open logbook where we log release dates and signatures. I found a name that made my throat go hot. Evan Ames. Release? Never. The date next to received was the year Carla would have been 2. The handwriting beside it, tight and tidy, was Ortega's. He had kept the baby when the family never came, because sometimes that's what happens, by accident or by grief. And at some point, years later, an entry in round handwriting had been added in the margin. By request of family. Place in locket. There was more writing there that my stomach didn't want to read. 2 words. Wrong drawer. I closed the book. I sat down on the low stool. The cooler behind me breathed. The building listened. The picture that formed in my head wasn't a ghost. It was a man with walnut hands and the weight of the town on his shoulders, tucking other people's undone tasks into his pockets until he ran out of room. I imagined him taking the ashes of a toddler and dividing a pinch into a locket at the request of a mother who finally found the courage to come back and ask. I imagined a moment where 2 labels got swapped, or a small sealed tin went to the wrong bag. I imagined a wrong drawer that had never gotten noticed because nothing bad happened after it. Except the thing that had happened after was everything. The wrong bead, the wrong box, a piece of someone's small boy left in the dark when he should have been resting on his mother's chest all those years. I called Carla again. I asked if she could come by. I couldn't tell her everything over the phone. My job is to carry what I can so she doesn't have to carry it all at once. When she walked in, I handed her the locket first and watched the air change around her. Then I told her I had reason to believe that not all of Evan was in there, and if she wanted, I would fix that with hands that didn't shake. I would make sure he was there. She cried. Of course she did. You learn that crying is a language with more verbs than we have names for. She said, "Can I be with you when you do it?" I said, "You can be anywhere you want." We did it carefully. I got permission from myself, which sounds strange, but the dead get a vote, and from the room, because that's respect. I pulled the tiny tin with Evan's name. I pulled a very long memory, because doing this in front of a living person is hard, even when you have done it alone 100 times. I pinched just enough, a light little kiss of ash, and I eased it into the locket. I sealed it. I wrapped it in a cloth that was softer than the cheap ones we keep. She took it like it was a bird. I figured that was the work. Sometimes that's all haunting is, a nudge toward a correction. I figured that if ghosts exist, they're made out of unfinished administrative tasks, as much as they are out of sorrow. I imagined Ortega somewhere rolling his eyes at me for making it into a production, and I smiled at the wall for the first time in 2 days. The knock stopped. The rosary stayed where it should. The retort behaved. For a while. 3 weeks later, a woman came in asking to plan ahead. She brought a folder with the crisp edges of someone who makes lists for a living. Her name was Nora, and she was ready down to which song she wanted her niece to play on the cheap chapel piano. Planning ahead is the kindest favor you can do for your family. I tell everyone that, but nobody listens until they've buried a parent and wished for one less form to sign. We sat in the arrangement office where the couch sags in the middle. She asked 100 questions, and I answered them. She was firm about cremation. She was firm about not making anyone stand around a hole in the ground pretending the wind wasn't a relief. When we were done, she said, "This building is quieter than I expected." I laughed. I couldn't help it. Usually people say it's creepier. She looked at me a long time and said, "No, I mean it's quieter now." "Now?" I said. "I came through here years ago," she said. "For my sister. The walls felt like they had mouths. I tell you that not because I believe rooms talk, but because sometimes they do. You don't hear words. You hear relief or grief the way you hear heat coming off asphalt in August. It's there whether you believe it or not. Here's where you expect the big twist, right? The part where I realize I'm the one in the drawer. I promise you it isn't that. I'm here. I'm talking to you. I eat terrible cereal, and my phone screen is cracked, and I keep gym shorts in the bottom drawer of the prep room, because it's cool down there. And sometimes in August, I think I'll pass out. I'm annoyingly alive. But there is a twist. It's small on the surface. It lives in a pocket like a pebble you forget and then rest your hand on in a movie theater. We were cleaning out the old desk in the arrangement office because the drawer sticks, and frustrated families don't need the indignity of yanking it open like a raccoon. Under a stack of old laminated obit samples and a business card for a florist who retired, we found an envelope. Yellow, brittle, addressed in Ortega's hand. For the one who listens. I stood there with my thumb under the flap and felt like a kid about to open a report card. Inside were 3 things. A photo of the prep room 20 years ago. The table looked the same. The cooler looked the same. The lights were rounder, the old bulb kind. The second thing was a key, old and dark, with a tag tied to it that said 3rd door, which annoyed me because we have 2. Then there was a letter on paper thin enough to see the shadow of my skin through it. "Listen," he wrote. "You think you are here because you are good with hands. You think you are here because you can carry heavy without grunting in front of a widow. That's part of it. The other part is that this building needs a person who can hear the little noises and not run away. Sometimes those noises are bad bearings. Sometimes they are what people didn't get to say. If they make a fuss, check your work. Check the tags. Check the cards. If everything is right and they still fuss, look for the thing a mother would be mad about. You will always find it." I sat down on the saggy couch and felt such a ridiculous wave of affection for a man who could be prickly as a thistle that I had to wipe my eyes again like an amateur. You're wondering about the key. I was too. 3rd door. I'd lived in the building alone. There were 2 doors in the prep room. The one that goes out to the chapel hallway and the one that opens to the garage. I'd never seen a 3rd. I carried the key like a rabbit's foot for a week. And then at 3:17 on a Tuesday, because apparently the universe loves a callback, I heard that gentle tapping again. Not from the cooler. From the wall behind my rolling shelves of cotton and gloves and extra tissues. There's a seam there I had never questioned. A vertical line of paint that looks like what you get when you roll paint with lazy overlap. I pulled the shelves. I pressed my hand to the seam. The key fit into a little brass circle the same color as old paint. The door swung out toward me with a squeak that sounded like a word I don't know. Behind it was a space the size of a small closet, a tiny cold room, old coils, a corner shelf, empty except for 2 things, a stack of very old ledger books and a single cardboard box with a tag. Unclaimed cremains, 1978 to 1984. Even if you're new here, you know what that means. Someone's people. Somebody's name in a box. I carried it out like it was glass. I called the state, because there are rules about how to handle this. I called families that were findable. A couple of the names found homes. A couple didn't. The rest I moved to the proper shelf and made sure their labels were clean, and wrote a note that was so clear, even a jerk 40 years from now could open the book and know what had been done and what hadn't. The tapping stopped for a long time after that. The generator still hiccuped, because it's a pain in the neck. The lights still buzzed. The building still breathed. But the room felt less like it wanted to talk. I wish I could tell you that's the end. I wish I could say that if you listen once and get it right, you buy yourself years of quiet. Maybe some people do. Last winter, on a Wednesday where the snow came down in lazy, heavy flakes, A transport brought us a man from the next county. The hospital was full and they farm out. His name was familiar in a way that made the hairs on my arm stand up. You ever have that? You see a name and your mouth says it around a memory you haven't reached yet. His tag said Harrison Ames. The last name stuck. I checked the file. Husband of Charlotte. Father of Carla. Father of Evan. I stood in the doorway of the cooler with my breath smoking in front of my face because I hadn't cranked the heat up yet, and said, Of course you came to me. I did what I always do. I said his name. I said what I would do. I put my hand on the drawer in that stupid little pat I always do, like a coach patting a shoulder. I went upstairs and called Carla, who has my cell now, and texts me pictures of her mother's locket when she wears it, to remind me that some fixes stick. She asked me if I could part her dad's hair on the right, because he liked to be contrary. She asked me to bury him with his hands crossed the way he used to fold them during long sermons, even though he hadn't been to church in a decade. She asked me, in a voice that was tired and soft, and not a little proud, if Mom could keep the rosary this time. I went back down, and I did all those things, because you can give the world back in little pieces. When I closed Harrison's drawer, a card slipped loose from the clip and fell face down. I picked it up. Blank side. I turned it over and felt the kind of drop in my stomach you only feel when you look down from a height you didn't know you were climbing. It was a toe tag. Blank, except for the line where the name goes. Someone had written mine in that round hand I'd seen 3 times now. It said my full name. It had a date. Not the day I was standing in. Not the next. Not a week out. A date 5 years from that Wednesday in February. I know what you're thinking. Sick joke. A coworker. A morbid little message from a universe that doesn't have to play by rules. I am not telling you it was mystical. I am telling you what I did. I laughed. It came out too loud in the quiet room. I set the card on the counter. I went upstairs and I ate half a sandwich I couldn't taste. Then I went back down and the card was gone. I looked for it the way you look for your keys when you're late and ready to blame strangers for stealing them. I didn't find it. I did my work. I went home and I lay on my couch and stared at the ceiling until the cheap clock ticked itself hoarse. Here's the part you can hold however you want. I don't care if you believe me. We can drink a beer, and you can laugh and say it's stress, and I'll agree with you, because that makes both of us feel less like the floors on a hinge. On the 1st of February this year, 5 years out, I worked a simple day. 2 prep, 1 arrangement, a graveside with a flag and a bugle recording that always sounds like the bugler is right behind the wall you can't look over. I went home. I set my phone on the kitchen table. I passed out on the couch during an episode of Something with a Detective who never once files a single form and still keeps his job. I woke up at 3:17. I am not making that up. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet you only get when snow is holding the whole world still. In the dark, the ceiling looked like a pool. I listened for the building, which is ridiculous because I don't live there, but I did it anyway. In the dark, I said my name out loud. Then I said, I'm going to keep saying other people's names first. Nothing answered. Of course, nothing answered. The house isn't a talker. In the morning I went to work and I checked the ledger in the drawer where I'd tucked Ortega's letter. The toe tag was there. It had my name. The date was the day before. Someone had drawn a line through it with a single stroke and written 2 more words in that round hand. Not yet. You can hold that however you want. Good story. Creepy note. Stress. All true. I kept the tag. I put it in the same envelope as Ortega's letter. I keep them in the bottom of that same drawer in the arrangement office with the key. Sometimes I take them out and look at them when everything gets too loud, and it helps. I can't tell you why. Maybe I like reminders that paperwork doesn't run the world. Maybe I like proof that the world is messier than forms. If you ask me what I believe, I'll give you the same small answer every time. The dead are mostly quiet. When they talk, they don't tell you the kind of things you think you want to know. They remind you to check your tags. They tell you which drawer is wrong. They stand your hair on end at 3:17 until you move your chair and find a locket you didn't know was missing. They tap once, twice, 3 times when you're doing a thing that matters. When they do speak up, it's about love, which is the only thing big enough to make noise from the other side of a closed door. I still talk to them. If you catch me in the prep room around midnight, you'll hear it from the hallway. I narrate what I'm about to do. I joke a little when something is stubborn. I tell a teenager he looks like he could have started a band. I tell a father he has his dad face on, and his daughter will like that. I say a mother's name like I'm saying grace before dinner. If the cooler knocks, I don't ignore it. Sometimes the building is just a building. Sometimes it's a friend clearing its throat because you missed a detail. Sometimes it's an old mortician, half a generation away, leaning in from the corner of your eye with a key and a sentence or 2 you needed to hear. And sometimes, on a still night, I pull the metal chair up in front of the cooler again. Habit mostly. Respect. Insurance. I sit there with a coffee gone cold while the hum settles down around me, and I watch for a card to slip, or a light to flick, or a locket to flash a little help. I listen like somebody's best friend, like somebody's kid, like somebody with a name on a tag that isn't a promise, only a guess. If you ever stop by for a pre-need, or because you've had the worst day of your life, and you need someone to act like the wheels won't fall off, and you hear me down the hall talking, that's all it is. Me, making sure the room knows I'm listening. Me, saying names. Me, being stubborn on your behalf. Me, telling you without saying it that we will find the right drawer. And if the lights flicker while we sit together, you'll see me glance up and smile. Not scared, not anymore, because I've learned something nobody put in a class or a book or an exam. In this line of work, the scariest thing isn't a door opening by itself. It's the idea that nobody will notice if the wrong little things get away from us. But if you listen, the dead will help you keep count. They'll make a fuss. They'll nudge your hand. They'll tap 3 times at 3:17 until someone like me pulls a chair over, sits down, and promises to pay attention. I can keep that promise. It's not heroic. It's habit. It's love, I guess, in the only way I know how to offer it. And if someday, 5 or 10 or 50 years from now, you come looking for me, and I'm not the one to open the door, look in the ledger. Maybe you'll see my name in that round hand, with a date and a neat line through it. Maybe there will be 2 words under it. The best kind. Not yet.